Innovative local communities held the key to fighting climate change. Meet Peter Minang, an expert with over 20 years of experience in ecosystem services and community forestry. To ensure urbanization without interfering with, natural resources like trees from where you sit.
No, I mean trees in urban areas are becoming a really big part of our story. We are trying to work more and more with governments, more and more with urban people, because we recognize that there is a big change in the nutrition for people who actually plant this diverse set of fruit trees or this diverse set of nuts in their compound.
Where do you sit at, and what advice would you give an African country about how do we deal with climate change, Peter?
So here at C4E Craft, what we do, we work on a number of things with countries. One of our biggest strengths is monitoring, data and science and monitoring. And so with that, we try and bring the best data on trees and forests as much as possible to the countries to show and work with them on what will work and what will not.
Join me as we explore his vision for a greener future. Hello and welcome to Globe Traktion. My name is Persil Telewa. This is a story that could change our approach to the planet. So enjoy. Look at you. That's good work you're doing.
Yeah, no, we're trying to do good work.
Yeah.
Trying to support the government of Kenya, the people of Kenya, doing a lot of work in different places. So we work in 14 countries in Africa.
Yes.
Kenya is our oldest country, of course. And here we do a lot of work in almost about 43 counties. And our heaviest work now is in Makueni, but we do work up in the north as well.
Yeah. So what are you doing in Makueni right now?
So in Makueni, we're supporting two levels of work. We support the counties with some restoration programs.
Yes.
So some tree planting programs.
Yeah.
And the tree planting, so we don't only plant trees, we actually help them to grow trees and develop some value chains around those trees, because when you plant trees only, then there is no incentive for people to look after them.
Yes.
And so the trees just wither and die off.
So how do you make sure they have planted, but they are still taking care of them until the trees?
So we do 3 or 4 things. The first thing that we do is that we try and make sure that where we are planting, we are bringing in some water sources. So we help with rainwater harvesting in the programs that we do at household levels, but also at landscape level.
Yeah.
We support them with value chains around some of the trees that they're developing. So we've supported mango, avocado, value chains in Makueni.
Yes.
A lot, orange value chains in Makueni a lot. And we are now working, because we realize that at the county level, it's not sufficient. We are now working with national level as well, in collaboration with counties, to develop monitoring programs. So we develop software, for example, where you can actually know what tree is best for what place in Kenya. So even at your shamba, you can check where on your farm what tree can grow best.
So does that mean you guys have tested the soil pH and
those kind of things? We've tested all of the soils. We have one of the best soils labs in the world. Certainly in Africa, the biggest collection of soil samples. And we do state-of-the-art soil tests here, hyperspectral remote sensing based soil analysis. That is world standard. And so we actually have the biggest database on soils in Africa.
Yeah, I've been speaking to my niece, very young, and they asked me, environmental conservation is quite boring. How can we make it exciting for the young people?
So normally, the first thing that I normally say is that we need to transition from just planting trees to making trees a business. And I'll give you a few examples.
Yes.
We think if you go to Makueni and you look at the way orange has evolved and the factory that the government of Makueni built for orange juice production and other sub-products, that changes the whole game. If you go to Muranga County and you look at how many people are benefiting from avocado value chains, now with exports to China, it's a bit different game. We are looking at other opportunities. So we looked at President Ruto's 15 billion trees program.
Yes.
And we did an analysis and we said if of
that
the 15
was to be
billion,
met,
was only 1 billion was planted as trees that produce commodities. We would, like fruits or like gum or like timber. We would be making an economy of about 56 billion US dollars in 10 years.
That is good.
That is 5.6 billion a year, which is bigger or equivalent to tourism's contribution to the Kenyan economy.
That is good.
I'll give you an example. In the north of Kenya, Turkana, all the northern counties, the gum arabica is a raisin, grows very freely. They don't even plant them. It's a naturally occurring tree. Sudan, that is a neighbor to Kenya, makes $100 million from gum arabica.
Gum,
Kenya makes $200,000 a year from that. If you drive in the north, you would see trees where the branches are broken and the gum is oozing out of that. So we don't even need to plant the trees in the first 3-4 years. We just need to train people and to harvest properly and develop the market. And people in northern Kenya would be having millions of dollars in their pockets. So we want to see trees as a new economy, a new green economy for Kenya. Kenya currently imports more than about $600 million in wood and furniture products a year. Imagine if we were producing timber and we didn't have to import.
That would have saved a lot.
We would be self-sufficient. In that, we will save a lot of money. But if we develop the timber industry and develop the processing, we will be eating into that market and creating jobs for Kenyans. So we strongly at World Agroforestry and at C4E really believe that, and the numbers show that we can actually develop an economy in Kenya from trees and tree commodities that is bigger than tourism.
As an organization or institution, what is your target? Because I understand that is, your primary goal. But what is your target when it comes to Africa or when it comes to Kenya? What is it that you're looking forward to cover?
So our primary purpose, mission, is to make trees and change the livelihoods of poor people on the continent and also change the environment. So we are convinced, and the data shows that trees and the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, actually showed that agroforestry and forest management are some of the cheapest ways of combating climate change, both from an adaptation perspective and from a mitigation perspective. So we actually are trying to see how we can deploy trees into landscapes, into farmsteads, into communities in ways that would allow them not only to overcome climate change, but to also help them to reduce poverty. And that's really important for us. because if people can't get out of poverty with trees, then we don't see other competitive cheap means of them getting out of poverty, but at the same time adapting to climate change and promoting biodiversity.
You know what, Peter? What I was thinking about just before you came in, I'm like, why is environmental conservation and especially agroforestry such a difficult task? I mean, people should be excited to have trees. I mean, we see what happens when it's hot. We see what happens when people want to park their cars, they want to go under the shade. Why should that be a difficult affair from where you sit?
Well, there are 2 or 3 things that make it really challenging, and we recognize that. The first one is, you know, unlike normal biashara that you will do, where you can buy and trade things, when you plant a tree, it actually takes 3 to 4 years for you to start getting any benefits. Now, we have to recognize that farmers have a hard time surviving. So for them to plant something that will take 3-4 years before it starts producing, we at World Agroforestry worry about that. So what we're doing is having techniques like grafting that will allow some avocados, some oranges to start producing at 2 years or at 3 years, right?
So that people can see the benefit.
People can see the benefit early. But then it's still 2 years of waiting. It's still, 3 years of waiting, even when we reduce that. So that is still a challenge. So what we do is try and do designs where people can farm some vegetables or some things under the new trees, so that they combine them in what we really call real agroforestry, so that they can have things to go on and live with as the trees mature. But what it means is that it's challenging for people to go into trees only. They have to be able to take on other things. So that's one challenge. And it means that it needs some financial incentives to get things going for them, because for a while they'll be spending time on the trees, looking after the trees, but then not benefiting directly from it. So we try and work around financial incentives, we try and work around ways of making trees grow faster and be more productive, try and combine trees and a number of other food crops that are income generating at the early stages. We try and also work on good quality trees and seedlings. You have to recognize that about 80% of Kenya is semi-arid, right?
About what percent?
80%. 70 to 80% of Kenya is arid and semi-arid, which means that water is a challenge. That means if you plant a tree, you've got to find the water to keep it and to keep it going. So that's another challenge. That's why, as I told you in Makueni, when we design tree planting, we design with all kinds of techniques that allow you to manage water properly, like water harvesting when it rains, but also creating pits when you plant the trees so that it conserves water. Within that, you reduce the water loss as much as possible. So those are some of the things. It's a very knowledge-intensive activity. You have to know the right tree, you have to know how to manage the trees, you have to be able to access the right tree seedlings. So we try and manage that the best we can. Of course, funding is most of the time a limitation, but that is what we try and do, to manage all of those financial, time constraints and water constraints that the farmers have.
I understand you play also a really major role, in advising different countries on environmental issues. From where you sit, just the other day, there was floods in Central Europe. We had fires in the US, In Africa, we've had, drought and, even floods, as recent as less than 3 months ago. Where do you sit at, and what advice would you give an African country about how do we deal with climate change, Peter?
So here at C4E what we do, we work on a number of things with countries. One of our biggest strengths is monitoring, data and science and monitoring. So we have a big unit that looks at help countries to build databases on trees, on water, on soils, on climate, scaling down climate models, and modeling what the future would look like in terms of all kinds of trees,
Yes.
what crops would be in danger or not. And so with that, we try and bring the best data on trees and forests as much as possible to the countries to show and work with them on what will work and what will not work.
Yes.
And we also work with them, for example, with the government of Kenya now working on a monitoring, platform for tree planting in Kenya, supporting government institutions on those kinds of monitoring efforts. Because if you don't understand what's coming and know how you're doing, then you can't learn and you can't possibly change how you're doing things. The second thing that we've managed to do in many countries is develop agroforestry strategies, forest management strategies, plans, and also big implementation programs. We did the first agroforestry policy with the government of India, which is like a really was the first of its kind. And that has been a big eye-opener for many countries.
What did it focus on?
It really focused on developing policies around agroforestry. In India, it was very good because what it did is connect companies in India to providing incentives, tax incentives for tree planting.
Okay.
So you had a complete turnaround in terms of how companies in many states are doing tree planting, supporting forestry in ways that allow them to get tax breaks, to get, incentives for that kind of support. Because as I said to you before, the financial incentive for planting trees is a huge barrier. Because in that first period of 3, 4, 5, 6 years, depending on the kind of tree, you don't actually see any benefit. So you have young people, when they engage in tree planting, in tree management, they really have to be patient.
Yeah. And internally, what has been, the biggest bottleneck for your organization in just making sure that the community integrates into your projects?
I think for us, it's actually two things. I think the first thing is the finances to scale up. We have extremely good practices that we've developed. Our scientists are doing a brilliant job on the best tree science that you can have. We have that here. The best soil science that you can have, we have it here. But getting the sufficient resources to bring that to other places is where the challenge has been. We don't have a shortage of good knowledge. We don't have a shortage of what are the best trees to plant in what place. But we have challenges like how do we make sure that farmers in Turkana have enough water to be able to plant trees, to be able to adopt agroforestry, to bring tree products to the market, for example. Because even if they grow trees and there is no way for them to bring the products to the market, they don't see the value.
So who do you deal with? Do you deal with farmers? Who are your, primary stakeholders?
Our main target is really farmers, smallholder farmers. But we also work with governments, because without government policies, without government support, then we cannot deliver on our mission. We also work a lot with the private sector now, because technology is becoming a really huge, making a huge difference. As I told you, we have a software where you can actually go and click on your shamba. The greening app. Regreening app tells you shows you where you're planting, where we're planting trees. But we have other apps that allow you to know what is the best tree to plant on your shamba. How will it perform on your shamba? That is exciting. Compared to another place. And we have that database for the whole of East Africa. So technology is becoming a huge thing. We can reach more farmers. They can access our data, our information,
Yeah.
through those apps.
Great, that is interesting to hear. We are looking at what's going on all across the globe, and I thought one of the challenges you'd mentioned to me was, ensuring that even out of your stakeholder, normal, ordinary people are taking part in your project. How do you ensure that also an ordinary person like me, who is not a farmer, and I'm not a government, I'm not a private sector, how do I take part in agroforestry or, just regreening?
You wouldn't realize that when COVID happened,
Yeah,
urban agroforestry was an important part of food for people because there was no transportation. So people who had avocado trees in their compounds, next to their houses, who had oranges,
yeah.
who had, nut trees, immediately were benefiting from that. They couldn't buy that. It changes the game. We are able to show in our data that people who have different kinds of trees, even in their compounds, what
Yeah.
we call home gardens, have a better nutrition outcome than people who have no trees. So the ordinary person that you call who has these trees can actually benefit significantly from our work. We have a state-of-the-art nursery, and we support a lot of farmers with state-of-the-art nurseries where people can actually plant trees on their own and benefit from them.
I'm glad you mentioned that,
Yeah.
because I was looking at, urban centers, Nairobi not to be spared, Lagos and those kind of places. And you're like, how do you ensure urbanization without interfering with, natural resources like trees from where you sit?
No, I mean, trees in urban areas are becoming a really big part of our story. We are trying to work more and more with governments, more and more with urban people, because we recognize that there is a big change in the nutrition for people who actually plant this diverse set of fruit trees,
Yeah.
or this diverse set of nuts in their compounds. It makes a huge difference. But also, it does make a difference in terms of biodiversity, in terms of the ecology, in terms of cooling the effects of climate change.
Yes.
People who are in their compounds and they have a nice tree, they have a nice shade, they can actually enjoy cooler temperatures even when places are so hot, in their compound. So that makes a huge difference. So urban forestry, urban agroforestry is a really important growing area that we are increasingly investing in.
From the 17 years experience you've worked with ICRAF, yeah, I would like you to mention to me a few things that you are not taught, but the environment within you taught you, but the trees around you taught you, things that perhaps, the other public may not have learned.
When I first started going to DRC, for example,
Yeah.
you wouldn't realize that, trees harbor certain caterpillars that, for people in DRC, is a huge source of protein and very delicious.
When you mentioned caterpillar, my skin.
I know, but
It's food.
It's
The
food.
caterpillars are food.
It's food,
Yeah.
and people benefit from that. The other thing that, I don't think that I was taught at school about pollination, but I never really realized that trees and bees and insects are so important for keeping our planet going.
The ecosystem.
The ecosystem.
Yeah.
That even the roots of trees harbor certain microbes, certain microorganisms that are so significant for how our soils behave
Yeah.
and how they influence the food that we eat. So it's only being here at C4 Craft that I grow to see the importance of trees in those different dimensions that I wasn't necessarily taught.
Yes.
Or I was taught, but I didn't really see how important it was. Life on Earth would be a complete wreck without pollination. You know, if the bees are not there to move from one flower to the other in the forest, and the trees are not there, there are certain, you know, things that will never happen. We wouldn't have honey if we don't have, you know, trees and things like that. So that interconnectivity between, you know, trees and the ecosystem, between biodiversity and climate, and most importantly for me, the fact that in our countries, 65% of the GDP of Africa actually depends on land. And if we don't invest in land, then our countries would basically not exist, because most of our GDP comes from land and trees and forests, you know.
Yeah.
So it is important that we continue to think about the fact that the growth of our countries, the growth of our economies, that has to come through agroforestry, has to come through forestry. They are the cheapest ways. The science says that, of how we can fight climate change, of how we can get more biodiversity, but most importantly, how we can grow our economies in a sustainable way.
Growing up, Peter, this Cameroonian boy, what did you envision to be?
I'm not sure. I think my profession now purely an accident.
Yes. Tell me about that accident.
Yeah. I really wanted to become a pilot, more or less, when I started.
Yes.
That's why I was very passionate about geography and physics.
Yes.
And then certain things happened along the way, and I found myself being more interested in economics, and started being more interested in ecological economics, and then I went into conservation and went into ecological economics, and then I started with conservation and realized that for me the biggest revelation after 7-8 years in conservation was that yes, biodiversity is important, but a lot of the people around the forest were poor people. And they were not necessarily destroying the forest because they wanted just to destroy the forest. They were just making a living from the forest. Yeah. And so for me, it was the fact that we needed to find other ways of livelihoods for them, improving their lives to be able to keep biodiversity, to be able to keep the environment. And that's why I came to World Agroforestry Center.
That's how you switched?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about your childhood. Where did you school?
Well, I'm in a small place in Cameroon called Kumba, where I was born. Growing up, it was not a small town. It's about 400,000 people. But very commercial. It was a transit town between Cameroon and Nigeria, moving a lot of goods around. So I didn't grow up in a very highly conservation environment. So I just grew into it. But
a little bit more about your family, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, I very modest family. My father was a customs officer, and my mother was a housewife at the beginning, but I lost my father when I was 12, so very early. No, thank you. And then I matured very, very early on, and I started doing a lot of things. But my mom was very hardworking, trading a lot of stuff, and so she managed to send us to good schools. So. And then from there, everything just went on.
Everything just went on.
Yeah.
To the young person, you know, listening to our conversation, they look at the world today. and they don't have mentors, they don't have someone to look up to direct their careers and those kind of things. What advice would you give to them, and especially being an African boy who understands what it is like to survive and thrive in Africa?
I think we really need to get our young people to realize that there is hope in Africa. This is the continent of the future. I am very convinced that if you work hard, no matter where you are, if you work hard and you really, really think hard, you will be successful. And I think that people need to understand that the land for Africa is really where the future is. But as we work on the land, we need to think about how do we leverage technology, how do we leverage, the environment where we are to move forward. I can tell people, 30 years ago, Africa had less than 50 million people in the middle class. Today, we are talking about 350 million people in the middle class.
Wow.
So there is a market, there is a growing economy that needs young people to provide what it needs, and I think the biggest opportunities are here.
The biggest opportunities are in Africa.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Peter, for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Most welcome.
You can understand the jail didn't take long.
Yeah, no, it didn't take it's not too bad.
You're released and free to go.
Thank you.
I know issues of climate change are very vital, and each one of us at least has encountered the effects. Many thanks for watching the show tonight, and I hope you enjoyed Peter Minang, this Cameroonian gentleman's story. Make sure you join us again next Sunday at 11 p.m. East African time only on KTN. I'll be your host, Persil Telewa, and until then, bye-bye for now.